So just to start off, if you could first just introduce yourself and then your role within UNHCR representation in Northern Europe.
Yeah, so my name is Elisabeth Haslund, and I am a Senior Communication Associate and Public Information Associate in UNHCR's Northern Europe office. We're a multi-country office covering 8 countries, so the 5 Nordic countries and the 3 Baltic countries. I'm situated in Copenhagen, in UN City in Copenhagen. So I'm mostly covering Denmark, but also some of the other countries. And then I am spokesperson in Denmark, Iceland, Finland, Norway, Estonia, and Latvia at the moment.
So obviously not all, as you said, UNHCR regions are the same in terms of their focus and their mission. So how does your region uniquely contribute to that focus, and how is that different from the other UNHCR offices?
I mean, UNHCR is a huge international organization, a huge UN organization. We are present in almost 140 countries with more than 16,000 staff. And the majority of my colleagues, 90% of our staff, is in the field. So they are working on the ground in the countries hosting refugees, helping and assisting and protecting refugees. In our Northern Europe region, it's a different type of work we're doing, because UNHCR is not operational in these countries, meaning that we are not involved in the asylum processing of refugees, in the refugee status determination. We are not directly involved in reception of refugees, registering, integration programs. All these things are handled by state authorities and governments and different authorities in the different countries. So our role in this region is very different, and that's also why we are a very small office, a very limited number of staff. So what we're doing in our region is a bit of different things, but it's advocacy, advocating for improvement of refugee reception, improvement of refugee conditions. It's monitoring legislation being put forward by the different governments. So our legal colleagues and protection colleagues are looking into legislation, providing law comments and law observations on behalf of UNHCR. We're doing training. Again, it's my legal colleagues. They're doing training of, for instance, judges, caseworkers, border guards, lawyers. So different types of training into the Refugee Convention or other refugee-related aspects. Then we're doing awareness raising in the public. That's one of the things that I'm doing, trying to, first of all, ensure information about the global refugee situation, trying to sometimes address myths and misconceptions in the public. One example is whenever there is talk about refugees in Europe, in Northern Europe also, sometimes there's a lot of numbers being thrown around, and what we're trying to do is always convey the global proportions, because there is a tendency sometimes in media to portray the things going on in Europe as this is a huge refugee crisis, when in fact 85% of all refugees and displaced people, they are in developing countries. So trying to convey some important messaging and key facts and figures around the global refugee situation is one of the things that we're doing as well. Also providing faces to the statistics. I think to some extent in many countries, perhaps also the US, you often see refugees and the refugee agenda being reduced to numbers and statistics and expenditures. And sometimes we're forgetting that these are human beings we're talking about. It's children, it's women, and men who are the same as everybody else. They've just found themselves in a horrible situation, which has forced them to flee their homes. So trying to provide this personal perspective and this angle to the discussions, be it political or public or in the media, is also something that we are trying to do by, providing content, writing stories, doing different types of events and activities in the public sphere. Of course, participating in media engagement. So as spokesperson, I'm the one giving interviews to the media, both on domestic issues, but it could also be global issues. I think that's in the larger terms some of the activities we're doing here. So it's very much the advocacy, the legal support and recommendations to government, the awareness raising in the public sphere, where we then in our region don't have that direct contact with our persons of concern.
So going more in depth into that, as you talked about the idea that refugees are in the end people and we need to kind of stop looking at them as numbers. What do you think that we as the public and also government officials need to change in regard to the way that we look at refugees on a global scale?
I mean, that's a huge question, because where were you talking? Are you talking the US? Are you talking Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland?
Yeah, let's talk about your region specifically. Yeah.
Well, I mean, again, I'm covering 8 countries, so it's different to just pinpoint them. But I think what I always like to suggest people is to try and, is for the personal meetings to take place, because I think that, and that's in probably all aspects of life, you can form a lot of ideas, you can form a lot of sometimes prejudice against people without even knowing them, without even hearing their stories. So I think, and that's also what I hear from some of the refugees that I are in contact with in Denmark, is that they're saying sometimes people talk about us like we're just figures and we're numbers, but then when we are face to face with a Dane, we are welcomed, we are received with open arms, a positive mind, curiosity, people asking to hear their stories. So I think that's one of my main suggestion would be, if you want to learn about refugees, try and meet a refugee. So we shouldn't only be talking about refugees, we should be talking with refugees, meeting them face to face as a human beings they are, and just be curious to learn from them, to hear their stories, to hear their point of views, and also getting that mutual understanding that people can come from a different background, they might have been through traumas and horrible experiences, but in the end there are so many things that are how do you say, instead of dividing us, that are bringing us together. So many fundamental values, like you want to take care of yourself and your family, you want to have the best future for your children, you want to have a job so that you can be independent and live independently. I mean, those are values and perspectives in life that I think are the same, no matter if you are living in Phoenix or in Copenhagen, or you have been living in Syria but have been forced to move to another country.
So more related to the mechanisms that you use to kind of convey that message to the people in your region, can you just talk about how technology has had an influence on those methods of public advocacy and how that's opened up opportunities for you?
Well, I mean, technology, I think, a lot of our communication efforts is, of course, through the media. So it's through, let's say, regular mass media, engaging with media, but we're also very active on social media, of course. That's where many in the public, they are active on social media platforms. So we need to be there where the discussions are taking place. And of course via our website as well. I'm not really sure what kind of other technology you could be thinking of, again, from our communication perspective. But I mean, one thing I could mention is that we've had a lot of success in using virtual reality films and virtual reality goggles when engaging at public events, in particular actually events for young people, because there is something interesting about the virtual reality technology, and it allows you to get a very realistic insight into a situation. So what we're using is some different virtual reality films filmed in refugee camps, and where we are then actually allowing the public via virtual reality to kind of step into a refugee camp and get this very concrete, even if they're sitting in Copenhagen or in Stockholm or in Oslo, getting a very concrete insight into what is life like in a refugee camp. What does it look like? How is the everyday vibe in the camps? And I think we've had a lot of, I mean, that's my impression, is it's very effectful, and it's been really something that we've had very positive responses to. So I mean, both from youth and from adults, I've seen people actually started crying once they've been inside Zaatari camp in Jordan, one of the very big refugee camps in Jordan, hosting almost 80,000 Syrians. And I've also had, you know, young people who maybe first wanted to try the goggles because, oh, that's fun, that's kind of a game, but then they really saw how this is not a game, this is real life, and they kind of stopped and you could see that they were reflecting about the things that they have seen. So I think that's a good tool for us to use in our I wouldn't say necessarily the concrete advocacy, but at least in the public awareness raising, trying to create a little bit more of understanding for refugees, and hopefully also sympathy and solidarity with refugees, which is an important part of the job that I am doing. We're informing about the global refugee situation. We are trying to put a face to refugees, but all in all, this is of course to gain support for refugees, gain solidarity in the public, because if there is solidarity and support from the public, that will hopefully also manifest into the political life. If the public is positive towards refugees, hopefully we will also see that reflected in politics, in legislation, in policy making, and so forth, and also of course in donor activities, because that's another very important factor in our Northern Europe region, is that we do have countries that are of course host countries to refugees, not in huge numbers, not like we see it elsewhere in the world, but our region, especially the Nordic countries, are traditionally very strong donors to UNHCR and to the refugee work that we're doing. So that's also a perspective in our work, to make sure that we support the donors and make sure that they want to continue to be strong supporters of UNHCR. So providing visibility of the impact of the contributions they give us. Do one more.
I just wanted to ask about the different challenges that you faced, because again, a purpose of this is to inspire people to get active in creating this change. So so what kind of challenges and pushback have you faced in your work through advocacy?
I think that's pretty, I don't know, I think that's difficult to answer, because I'm not really sure what you're referring to. I mean, for UNHCR, we're UN organizations. We're apolitical. So, I mean, we're supposed to be politically neutral. We're here to help people to ensure refugee protection and also protection of stateless and asylum seekers and internally displaced. So, I mean, we can advise governments, and we are in many countries working with governments, very closely with governments. So, I mean, as for challenges, well, if I'm looking in our region, sometimes we give recommendations that are not being followed. It happens. So of course that can be a challenge. But I think that's also just reality. I think one perhaps a major thing to underline, I would say, is that we've seen in several countries in our region, and perhaps also in many other countries in our part of the world, and it has been mentioned many times by our High Commissioner, is that refugee protection and refugee and help to refugees has increasingly become very political. So we're seeing a lot of political strategizing, political discussions, political fights around the whole discussion on whether or not to protect refugees, and where our High Commissioner has put it sometimes and several times that these are core values that we shouldn't start questioning. So I think that is in our time, and that's an unfortunate tendency that these things are getting politicized, and these things are becoming, topics of very intense and heated political discussions, which is not helping the refugee cause, which is not helping us improving refugee protection and strengthening refugee protection, and making sure that we're actually seeing an expansion of refugee protection when we're seeing every year more and more people being forced to flee. Instead, we're seeing restrictions, we're seeing reduction of refugee protection, and I mean, that's the wrong way to go. And now I'm talking very general, of course, and on the high level, but I think that is definitely one of the big challenges facing not only our organization in general, but perhaps also other organizations, civil society groups, and other stakeholders that are working to help and protect refugees.